Good morning, everyone. For my project, I wanted to talk about the Japanese imperial comfort women from the years around 1932 until 1945. Before I began talking, I did want to give everyone a little bit of a trigger warning that this presentation does have some darker and more mature topics such as sexual assault, abduction, and different forms of slavery. If there is anyone who's maybe sensitive to these topics, I would maybe go outside, maybe grab a snack, or just tune me out until we're done. To begin, I wanted to talk about the most basic question. What does it all mean? What did it mean to be a comfort woman? Comfort women, or ianfu, refers to young women and girls kidnapped, coerced, and forced into sexual slavery and servitude by the Japanese Imperial Army from the years 1932 to 1945. Who were these women? In terms of geography, these women were taken from all parts of intercontinental Asia and some parts of Eastern Europe, and they were all targeted by the Japanese. However, those within Korea, Indonesia, China, and the Philippines were the most often taken. In terms of status, the Japanese Imperial Army had really no to little regard whether these women were of high or low ranking status at the times of the kidnappings. Another important point that I want to address is that while we do refer to these ladies as comfort women, many of them were young girls within their teenage years, some as old as 12 years old, so extremely young when they were taken. A term often used across Japanese imperial documentation were comfort stations. So these were a euphemism used to describe the stations as comforting stations for soldiers under high stress during times of war, and an active military strategy in order to not upset local communities and reducing the risk of venereal diseases across Japanese soldiers. In reality, these were actually brothels that the women were forced to go to, and they were forced to undergo hours on hours of repeated sexual assault with no regard for their health, and the majority of them did pass away. A question that often emerges when talking about comfort women and the comfort stations in general is, how did they even keep them there? The stations were often heavily guarded by armed soldiers to keep the women contained, and also, in some cases, they would forcibly inject them with addictive drugs such as opium and other addictive substances. In total, it's estimated that around 410,000 women were taken by the Japanese Imperial Army within this time period. This brings us into our next point, today's impact. Why do we care? Why should we have to learn about comfort women and what they went through? Here below, you can see the Statue of Peace, or Ari as it's called across the world. It's a statue that is supposed to bring honor and respect to those who have been taken by the Japanese Imperial Army within this time period, and also act as a piece of recognition, as many of the Japanese Imperial Army soldiers after World War II tried to essentially deny that they ever existed. It actually wasn't until 1991 that the Japanese government even once acknowledged the existence or mentioned comfort stations or comfort women at all. This was in part due to many of the victims not stepping forward until well into their lives, many as elderly women, with only 14 of the 240 registered survivors still surviving today. Another point that I want to emphasize is that throughout the presentation, I've put comfort women in quotation marks, as the majority of the survivors that are still around today and have been in different forms of activism reject the term, and they see it as an object of oppression. Instead, they prefer a term that translates roughly in English to be grandmothers, or an honorific term for older women to respect what they have gone through and what they've survived. This brings us back to our essential question. Why do we need to know this? Sadly, the sexual assault of women has been an aspect of warfare since as far back as most modern history. But this is the first time in global history that we had seen it as a deliberate military strategy on such a mass scale. I believe that this should be seen as a wake up call to the rest of the world, especially in modern times when political, economic, and social divides make us seem so different. But with the rise of technology and all sorts of other global aspects, we know more about each other than ever before, which includes and allows us to help those who are suffering from similar or even worse situations today. While this is a very dark topic, I felt that it needed to be a part of my presentation, as throughout all of my Asian history courses that I've taken across high school and college, these women have gotten very little regard and very little space within the academic areas. And I felt, as a woman and also as a future historian, that it was important to emphasize even the darkest points of the past in order for us to understand what's happening today and possibly in our future, especially as political agendas and the modern world change with time. I did, however, want to leave this presentation on a high note by including a quote from Seo Woon Chung, one of the oldest and most active survivors of the Japanese comfort women phenomena. I kept telling myself that I just have to stay alive. They may have killed my body, but not my spirit. This is how I survived. Thank you guys for listening, and please do come to me with any questions that you might have. Thank you.